Hello everyone. Before we begin our presentation, I will be playing on my recorder the theme from Harry Potter. Hello again, and welcome to our presentation, Self-Advocacy Isn't Just About Ourselves, a guide to speaking up for people with various and differing disabilities. My name is James Williams, and I will be hosting this presentation alongside my co-presenters, Rebecca Marshall, Naratam Cecil, and Mackenzie Stoss. Now, some of you might be wondering, why did I start this presentation by playing the Harry Potter theme on my recorder? First, the Harry Potter series is a very popular series among many people with disabilities who often feel like they can relate to many characters within Harry Potter. Second, there are many parts of the Harry Potter series, including a lot of the things that Harry Potter himself goes throughout the book series, that mirror many significant milestones that people with disabilities go through. And probably one of those milestones that is very significant to people with disabilities is in the first book of Harry Potter, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when at the beginning Harry Potter doesn't realize he's a wizard and he's different than other individuals that are known as muggles in the book. And before Harry Potter learns he's a wizard, he notices there's something different about him, but he doesn't know what that is. And finally, he is told by Hagrid, another character in the book, "You're a wizard." And when Harry Potter learned he was a wizard, a lot of things that he didn't understand started to make sense, especially as Hagrid described, "Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain when you were upset or angry?" To paraphrase him. And Harry Potter learning he's a wizard has been utilized by various self-advocates with disabilities like myself to compare what it's like when you have a disability, but you don't know what the disability is, and then you finally find out what specifically your disability and/or difference is. In addition, as Harry Potter grows and matures throughout the book series, he realizes, as he prepares for his ultimate quest to defeat the villain Lord Voldemort, that he can't complete that quest by himself. He not only has to speak up for himself as a wizard, he has to complete that quest with the help of his friends and others. And in doing so, he develops compassion for other beings and other wizards and witches within the wizarding world that he becomes a part of. Indeed, he becomes known throughout the series for having tolerance toward other beings and other individuals that are sometimes looked down on in the wizarding world. There's one scene, in fact, in the second book, in the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry meets a house elf for the first time. And in the wizarding world, house elves are looked down on in that society, yet he treats this house elf with respect. And the house elf points out to Harry that, most wizards don't treat house elves with the respect he's treated Dobby, this current house elf. And Harry Potter responds by saying, "You can't have met many decent wizards then, not knowing the lower status of the time that house elves are given in wizarding society." Harry Potter and his example really conveys an important message, the message that I'm hoping to share today in this presentation alongside my co-presenters, that it's important to know how to speak up for yourself. And a lot of times when you have a disability, you're told the importance of speaking up for yourself, speaking up for your disability. But in the end, none of us live alone. As the old saying goes, no man is an island. We all live within the context of either a social group, friends, a family that we were born into. We all live within the context of other people that help us get to where we need to be, that oftentimes we need to ask for help when we, as a people with disabilities, need it. Speaking up for ourselves, in many ways, isn't just about speaking up for our needs. It's about speaking up for other people in our lives. And sometimes, as a good friend to other people with disabilities, speaking up for them as well. So many of us with disabilities want friends like other non-disabled people. Many of us have been excluded from many parts of life that other non-disabled people take for granted. But that doesn't mean that we as people with disabilities also want to be included too. At the same time, although disabilities come in shapes and sizes, you might have a hidden disability, such as autism or ADD. You might have a physical disability, such as cerebral palsy or spina bifida. You might be blind, you might be deaf. You might have a disability that hasn't even been named yet. Although disabilities come in different shapes and sizes, like I mentioned above, people with disabilities still live within a world with a system and a framework that doesn't always meet their needs. And one thing I have learned as a person with autism, going to school in special education, having classmates with different disabilities, even classmates that also had autism but had issues very different than mine, is that although our issues can be different, although there are things that might not bother me but could bother my classmates, or vice versa, things could bother me or not bother me and might have totally different reactions based on their disabilities, we still had to function within a single special education department that didn't always understand what we needed as students with disabilities. And many of us with disabilities were functioning in a society where we often have to fight for some of the same services throughout our life. We also have to fight for sometimes the same type of awareness in a world that doesn't always understand what our disability is. Therefore, I have come to believe that it's not just important for a person with a disability to speak up for themselves, it's also important for us to learn how to speak up for others as well. Others with different disabilities, others with various disabilities, other people with disabilities that might be the same as ours, but they might experience the same disability different than ourselves. Because in the end, we're all part of a big disability community. We're all fighting for similar recognition, for similar acceptance, and for services within the same framework of service providers that may or may not understand us when we need them to. So, how do we speak up for other people with issues and disabilities that are not our own? The first thing that we all have to remember is that none of us are going to personally experience every issue that a disability might go through. There are things that I go through as a person with autism that are not the same as other people I know with autism. I have friends with cerebral palsy who are on one part of the cerebral palsy spectrum, but that is not the same as another part of the spectrum. However, regardless of our lack of personal experiences, that doesn't mean that we don't have an ability to listen to other people and their struggles. Anyone with the proper assistive technology, with the proper level of understanding and humility, can listen to another person. Anyone who is willing to and able to can learn from others. And in a world where people with disabilities, regardless of what that disability is, have to exist with non-disabled people who don't always understand our disability, I have come to realize that we have a responsibility to listen to each other, even if our disabilities may be very different from one another. But alongside listening is being open to a reality that a lot of people with disabilities go through, and that is sometimes a person with a disability has an issue that not only disables them, it also results in them butting heads with many cultural norms that don't allow them to speak openly about that issue. And I'm going to give a pretty blatant example that might make some people uncomfortable, but this is an issue that I've known a lot of people with disabilities go through. And this issue, when I was in high school, became a big part of my maturity and how I grew as a self-advocate when I was exposed to an issue that I would never personally experience myself, but I still felt compelled to listen and learn about. When I was in high school, I had a combination of special education and general education classes. Now, I went to a school where the special education department was very sexist. And as a male with male privilege, although I was disabled, I didn't totally realize until my female classmates started helping me understand some of the sexism that was going on within the special education department in my high school. I remember once when I became friends with a girl who was in special education, and she wasn't autistic, but she was born with a physical deformity. In her case, she was born without a left hand. Her left arm ended at her elbow, kind of like, Captain Hook not having a left hand. And I remember getting to learn about her struggles, only having one hand and having an arm that ended at the elbow. And I'll never forget once when she came to me and said, "James, can you help me ask a teacher for assistance in a class that I'm taking?" I was initially hesitant, wondering why she couldn't ask herself, but she said, "James, you're learning how to speak up for people. You're becoming an advocate. I see how you speak up for yourself. Can you help me speak up for myself?" And I agreed. And I went with her to her teacher and told her teacher exactly what she asked me to tell her teacher about an accommodation she needed. And you know what happened? Her teacher listened to me more than she listened to the student I was helping. And that's when I realized I was asked to help this student who became a good friend of mine in high school because of the sexism in the special education department. Because as a female, the teacher was less willing to listen to her than she was to listen to me as a male student. And that's when I realized too, we as a society don't like to talk about sexism. We don't like to talk about those issues. But in this case, although I personally was not born without a left hand, because I had certain privileges because of my male gender at the high school, I was able, by speaking up for that other individual and her disability, even though I'd never personally experienced what she went through, I was able to help her. And then I realized The ability to speak up for other people with disabilities that are separate than mine is just as important as learning how to speak up for myself. Not only does it help me as a self-advocate learn how to speak up for different disabilities, learn how the same system that's caused me struggles, the person with autism, can cause struggles for people with different disabilities. It's also helped me make many friends of people with different disabilities. And I'm sure many people with disabilities who are watching this right now, you know what it's like to be excluded from non-disabled people. You know what it's like when you just want to do something that other non-disabled people take for granted at certain stages of their life, yet you've been denied because of your disability. And one thing I realized when I experienced that too is I don't just have to try to stick to making friends with other people with autism. I could also try to make friends with people with different disabilities. In fact, when I was in the 5th grade, one of my best friends was a girl with cerebral palsy because at the time I was being bullied because of my autism. And she was getting bullied a lot because of her cerebral palsy. And we both were going through that exclusion, and we found this friendship with one another. And in that friendship, we both learned how to adapt to someone with a different disability and discovered that our disabilities complemented each other. I have autism, I have social issues, but physically I can move, I'm able-bodied. She didn't have the social issues I had. She had cerebral palsy, but the stuff she couldn't do physically, I could do physically. And the stuff I couldn't do socially, she could do socially. And so a friendship formed where we complemented each other's unique strengths and deficits. And so, in many ways, learning how to speak up for other people doesn't just help people with disabilities become better advocates, it can help us make friends with people with different disabilities. It can help us find inclusion amongst a wider disability community if we're being excluded by people who are non-disabled, by people who just don't want to understand our differences. In addition, learning how to speak up for other people not only does it help us make friends with people with disabilities, it also can help us create a support system for ourselves. Because one reality that a lot of people with disabilities often face is that as independent as we might want to be, sometimes we can't always be as independent as non-disabled people. Sometimes we might realize that we're going to live the rest of our lives dependent on members of our family or our trusted friends in order for many of our basic needs to be met. And if we can look to other people with disabilities to form that support system by making those friendships, it is more power to us. I remember once when I met a woman with cerebral palsy, and she found a person with cerebral palsy who was a little higher functioning than her. Not that he or she were more or less of a person, but they used their ability to speak up for each other, despite having different experiences, to become a support system. I was amazed when I saw how, despite their disabilities, they both formed a very nice romantic relationship where they both helped each other with their basic needs. One other thing, too, that I also learned after being exposed to the sexism that I saw and observed alongside my female classmates when I was in high school is that many disabilities often have gender differences. A male with a disability might and often experiences things very differently than a female of that same disability. I had many female friends with disabilities when I was in high school, many of which were my classmates, even though there were often a lot more male students than female students in special education due to that sexism. However, I made friends with many of those classmates and also made friends with many female students in my high school in an underworld of female students who needed services but weren't often getting them or getting the right services due to the sexist policies in my high school. And our friendship basically was based on a pact that we made. Now, like many other high school kids with disabilities, I was getting bullied because of my autism. There were these gangs of kids that just wanted to rip me apart and were trying to exclude me. And basically, when I became friends with those females with disabilities that were my classmates and basically were in my grade and who I went to school with, we made a pact and we basically agreed. I wanted friendship. I wanted people that I knew would be my friend, people that weren't going to reject me. And they said, we'll give you that friendship if you agree not to date us and not to put us in any awkward situations related to potentially dating us. And I agreed. And we stuck with that pact. And while many of our non-disabled peers were all getting themselves in high school drama as to who was dating who, we kept that pact. And many of them never tried to date me, and I never tried to date them. And some of them I'm still friends with to this day. But during our friendships, they helped me understand just how, in many cases, as females, they experience their disabilities very differently than I did as a male. And I realized that part of being a self-advocate wasn't just learning how to speak up for myself, not just among people with different disabilities. It was about realizing that I needed to learn how people with my disability experience things differently based on gender, based on age, based on many other different variables as well. And one other example that I plan to share regarding that advocacy is a situation where I traveled and visited a group of individuals with autism who were not as verbal as I was, who couldn't even talk, but used assistive technology and used letterboards to speak. And when I visited that group, although I am verbal, I can speak, I learned how those individuals use assistive technology to have the same communication abilities that I am able to by way of speaking. And I learned that what they needed was people to be patient when they wrote on their letterboards. And I realized that even if I'm verbal, that doesn't mean that if somebody doesn't want to wait for them to finish what they want to say on their letterboard, I can still tell somebody, be patient. These individuals may not be able to speak, but that doesn't mean that they cannot communicate. At the same time, another thing that is also important for us to understand is that sometimes, although many of us might be told when we're growing up with our disability that there are core social rules that we need to follow, we also need to pay attention to the fact that there are some social norms that hurt people with disabilities. Sometimes you can have an issue related to your disability that makes it difficult for you to function, but society tells you you can't talk about openly. Or you might be disabled with a part of your body that you can't openly share to everybody. And I believe that as advocates, we need to realize that sometimes we might have to fight to challenge those social norms in order to speak up for other people. And even if we can't change society's norms, we can possibly build friendships among others with disabilities where we agree amongst our friends that we will speak freely with them about things that society won't let them speak openly about. I have many friends with disabilities who are female, male, and have other gender identities, and I come from other backgrounds where a big part of our friendship is that they go through issues that society won't allow them to speak freely about. And I tell them, as part of being friends, if you're comfortable talking, I will let you speak to me. I will let you tell me the things that society doesn't want to hear. Because the reality we have to face is that part of the reason why the world we live in doesn't always understand our disabilities is because there are norms that sometimes stop us from speaking openly about the issues we go through with our disability. I have a very good friend who suffers from a disability called von Willebrand syndrome. Von Willebrand syndrome is a bleeding disorder, and there are parts of that disorder that she can't talk about openly because of societal norms. Yet we have built a friendship based on the fact that I let her tell me anything she wants to about her von Willebrand syndrome. I am basically going to close by quoting another very powerful line from the Harry Potter books, a line that Professor Dumbledore says to Harry Potter. It is our choices that make us who we are, far more than our abilities. People with disabilities don't always have the same abilities as non-disabled people, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we still don't have choices that we can make with the abilities we have. Let's make the choice to not only speak up for ourselves, but speak up for other people with disabilities that might need other people in order for them to speak up for themselves. Thank you for listening. And next up, to talk about their experiences, please welcome Rebecca Marshall.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Marshall, and I really want to thank James Williams for letting me speak today about self-advocacy and how it's not just about advocating for yourself, you have to advocate for other people as well. That's something that really hits home for me because I've been trying to advocate for not just myself, but for people, other kids on the spectrum since I was in middle school. One of the things that was different about my middle school is that it had separate classes for children with not just autism, but other developmental disorders, so they could learn to perform better in school and just to communicate better with other students. And off and on, like outside of the class, when we were with students who weren't in that, there were plenty of instances where kids would be unkind to us, unkind to me and to a couple other kids. And there was one particular instance I remember where we were all like just being like onslaught with ridicule. It was when I was in 5th grade. I had been invited to a sleepover by someone in my class who was in the special needs class with me, but also she had friends who were not in it that were going to be there. And so I went to the sleepover, and it started out okay. We were having fun, playing like video games, and then we started watching a movie. And then it started to get a little tense for everyone. And the tension was coming from two girls, they were twin sisters, and they were just outright rotten. They were rotten to me, to a couple like of the other people, and they were especially rotten to this one girl who had autism and depression. She was like really self-conscious and just struggling to make friends, and I remember the teacher mentioning something like that like briefly over the phone. So it started off like as minimal, just like teasing here and there towards all of us, and then it just got more and more aggressive to the point where they actually put phloem in my hair. I don't know if you know what phloem is, but it's like It's like a fun, like kind of foam that can be bent and twisted. They put it in my hair, and the mom of the girl who invited us had to like pull it out, or like help me brush it out. And then they started attacking the girl that was really self-conscious. I won't mention her name. She got more and more upset and started saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" She was stuttering. I could tell she was really upset. She was stuttering and saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" And it escalated to the point where these girls were cutting her off, and just being very rude and disrespectful and trying to act all smart and sassy. And they actually managed, I don't know how they did this, but they actually managed to get all the other girls in the room, except me, to turn on this girl and to kick her out of the bedroom. They made her sleep in the hallway, and she was crying. She was taking her stuff with her. She just didn't know what to look like. She didn't know what to do. And I was very upset. I was very angry with how she was being treated. And I told the girls, you know what? I don't want to spend the night with you. I don't want anything more to do with you. And I slept in the hallway with the girl so she wouldn't be alone. And before I left, I just remember telling her, you know, she's a person too. And just because she may talk differently or act differently from you doesn't make her any less important than you are. And it just was a really intense, tough moment. So yeah, I spent the night with her and in the hallway so she wouldn't be alone. And she was grateful for it. She thanked me for it afterwards. But I just remember feeling so bad for her and trying to speak up, say, "Hey, this isn't cool. Like, yes, like we both may talk differently than the rest of you, but that doesn't mean we're any less significant." And advocating for others, it really starts with how well you can advocate for yourself, and finding that way to do it can be challenging. It can be challenging to figure it out for yourself and how you can speak up for others. And I remember one instance, one of my friends from UCF, I won't mention her name for confidential reasons, but her and I were both in the same year, and she went through a period in the year where she just didn't feel the need to go to stay at UCF anymore. She wanted to make her own career in spin classes. And there was just a lot of things going on in her life. Some were family oriented. Others were just with her job. She had a lot of new things happening with jobs in between. And she worked more than one. And it was weighing on her so much that she just couldn't find any relief from it. And the way she found relief was by reaching out to her family and just saying, like, telling us like how she felt. And I remember like once we were at the Scottish Highland Games, and she started to cry because like she just remembered something that had happened to her earlier that week. And she just started to cry out of nowhere. And I remember a couple people were giving us strange looks, and I just told her, it's okay. She's fine. We just need a moment. And I asked her, "Are you okay? Do you need to step out? Do you need to leave?" And she said, "No, I'm fine. It's just I have a lot of stuff going on." Advocating for other people, it's not just speaking up for others, speaking up for what they need. It's also being aware of their needs. And that can range from, like, depending on what the person struggling with is and what the symptoms are. I know that for one for my brother, he has ADHD and autism. Sometimes he needs to step away or go do something to like calm himself down if he's getting too tensed up and energetic. And but it's also one of the ways that I felt a way to advocate for others in ways easier for me is through storytelling. I love telling stories. That's what my major is in. I'm a major in English. I love telling stories, and even though this story that I wrote, this experience that I had, it wasn't related to disorders directly, there were a lot of people that found it or like saw it that way. They started to see it that way. So when a few years ago, when I was a sophomore, I got this idea to write a story. It was about like beauty and beauty from within, and I entered it in the Florida College Honors like writing contest. It's a conference. It was a conference that was happening in Gainesville, and there was a writing contest as well in different categories: fiction and poetry and nonfiction. And the story that I wrote, it had one honorable mention at the conference. And as I was reading it, it basically was about this little girl who was not accepted by her peers. She wasn't invited to an outing with them. And she overreacted. She ran away from all of them because of how upset she was. And she suddenly found herself in this crumbling old garden. And there was an older woman inside the garden wearing a white robe, and she was like, even though she wasn't very pretty looking, she was very kind and sweet to the girl. And she told the girl she asked the girl for help in planting a flower. And inside the garden, there's all these like kinds of crazy plants and flowers that all look different. And the lady brings her to 2 flower beds. One has a set of like pink roses. They're all in rows. They're beautiful. They're perfect looking, but they all look the same. And the other flower bed has all kinds of flowers in it. It's like some are scary looking, some are mesmerizing, some are shimmering, some have different colors, spikes, leaves. And the lady gives her a rose that is like multicolored. It's not one. It's not pink like the first flower bed of them is. And she tells her to choose the flower bed that she feels like it should be planted in. And the girl, because of how unique the flower is, she puts the flower in the second flower bed with all the other crazy ones, the crazy different ones. And the story ends with her leaving the garden and the woman telling her as she's leaving that beauty or that value doesn't come from how you look or how you act. It comes from what you are. And so even though I know this story doesn't relate to self-advocacy in general, when I finished reading the story in front of the audience, there were a couple people who came up to me and were talking to me, and this was during a social after everybody had read. And when I told them that, or like in passing, I told them that I had autism, they said, "Oh, you know what? This really would make my son or my daughter feel really welcome and feel really appreciated. I know you said it was strictly about beauty, but I feel like this would make them feel advocated or that they're important as well." So it's really like that's one of the things I love about writing. It's a great way to aesthetically advocate and get people to realize or see things in a different way that they may not have seen if you weren't advocating for them. And even today, when I'm working, because I work at Disney, which will bring me to my next point later. I work at Disney in attractions, and some of the people I work with, they at first they didn't understand how I thought or how I process things, and I had to explain to them. Here's how I think. I know it may seem this way, but it's actually not. And this is how people function or try to function. And they usually walk away, 9 times out of 10, they usually walk away saying, I never thought of it that way. Wow, like thanks for opening my eyes to this. I think I'm going to approach it differently from now on. I still, at Disney though, you still get people who who still are oblivious to people with different disorders. And it's a happy place I can consider Disney a happy, accepting place for people with disorders, but you still get people who may not be as either aware or willing to be aware, and then you kind of have to step up and advocate for yourself and for other people. And sometimes that can be a challenge. I still hear nowadays people saying, oh, people on the spectrum or people with depression, they don't know disorders, they don't know how to control themselves. They don't know how to interact with others. They have no control. That's not true. We can have control. It's just a lot more challenging than as opposed if we didn't have a disorder. And there was one instance at Animal Kingdom that proved that. So I was spending the day, this is before I started working at Disney, I was spending the day with a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine from New York. He's living in New York now. And he had brought along a couple more of his friends that didn't know me very well. And throughout the day, I was starting to notice that they weren't including me as much. They weren't talking to me nearly as much as they were talking to him. And I knew he was trying to be inclusive. I knew he was trying to talk to me. He kept trying to bring me into it. But it was hard for him to talk to me and talk to them at the same time. And I was just starting to feel left out. And as the day went on and we were going to different rides, I started to get mad. I'm like, why are these people acting this way? Why are they being so ignorant? And so it culminated in when we were in the line for Expedition Everest. Expedition Everest is a roller coaster. It's based on Mount Everest in Syria. So we were in line for that, and I had been trying all day to ask my friend if he would ride with me with that. We got to the loading dock for the car, the roller coaster. And he told me he was going to ride with one of the other friends who had been ignoring me the most. I cannot describe how angry, the rage that was boiling in me at that point. I sincerely felt like I was not being respected or not being treated like the way that they were treating each other. And when we got to the dock, I didn't get into the roller coaster right away. I was just seething with rage and feeling very upset. And it occurred, but in that moment, it occurred to me, I had to, in those 5 seconds before the gate closed, I knew I had to make a choice. And it occurred to me, if I chose to walk away and be silent for the rest of the day, or even if I lashed out and started shouting, if I did that, not only would I be reinforcing what people think of people with disorders, I would possibly be marring my friendship with this person that I cared so much about. And so for the first time in my life, I decided, you know what? I'm mad, but I am not going to let that affect the rest of my day. I'm not going to let what these people are doing and saying affect me and affect my time here. And I got in the roller coaster. We rode it. We got off, and I waited until I had calmed down a little bit, and I told my friend and his friends how they were making me feel, and they were like, they were sorry. When like, oh, we're sorry. We didn't realize that we were making you feel that way. We didn't know about we were making you feel that way. And when I explained to them, because they had asked me, we saw you making like these faces, and we saw you like not talking to us or not speaking to us as much, and we weren't sure how to respond to that. And I had to tell them, I have ASD. That's probably what you were noticing. So that I wanted to share that story with from Animal Kingdom to show that it's always a good idea to advocate, because, and like to show that yes, advocating for others and for yourself it's hard. It's hard to do that, but it's not impossible. So these are my encounters with sharing about advocating for others and trying to speak up. And there's ways that you can do that. And once again, I'd really like to thank James for inviting me and for having me here. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
And now, to talk about their experiences, please welcome, under the avatar, Smilatom, Naratom Cecil.
For those of you who haven't seen my last video, I bet not a lot of people have because I kind of took it down a while ago. I just want to tell you that I gave myself a new nose. Press the pause button if you want to boop it. Hoi ho, it's me, Smilatom. Today I'm speaking about self-advocacy. I'm going to make this short and quick because I'm still recovering from toe surgery. Self-advocacy isn't just about ourselves. When a person has a disability, they know what it's like to have that disability. Meanwhile, many people with disabilities have heard about the importance of speaking up for themselves and the importance of self-advocacy. First, study their disability. For example, you might have autism and you want to speak up to someone with a case that's worse. For example, how would you speak up to somebody like him? Tell them what they're going through. What are their strengths and weaknesses? When you gathered up all that information, then you could be able to speak up for them. Second, find out how you're going to speak up for them. Study more and find out how people with a certain disability are struggling into society. Third, speak up. Their voice needs to be heard. Well, before I wrap this up, I just want to tell you about this really cool movie I came across on Netflix. It's called Neja, and I heard that this film actually beat Zootopia in the Chinese box office. Basically, the story in a nutshell deals with these two celestial beings who were born of two different types of celestial pearls. One is called the dragon pearl, the other is called the demon orb. They were born from this really sinister pearl, which then broke apart and formed into these two people, and they were meant to be rivals, but turned out to be friends at the end. It's a really cool movie. I suggest you watch it. Thought that was cool. I was blown away by the special effects. So like and write what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the Ice Age. Until then, one more meme. Also, I want to inform you that tomorrow I'm going to go to the Jacksonville Zoo's sweet new exhibit called Dinosauria. I have been so excited to go there ever since it first opened, and I'm finally going to get the chance to go there tomorrow. Yes!
And now, to share their experiences, please welcome Mackenzie Stoss.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Stoss. I'm 25 and I have autism. My interaction with my peers were some positive, some challenging, because some did really want to try to get to know me, while some only hung out with me because the teacher told them to and they wouldn't have otherwise. I had one classmate throughout school who was with me and took the time to understand me, and we became close friends. In high school, I didn't really go out with a lot of friends. I was just by myself, and then when I got older, I met some really close friends who I go out with a lot now. So it's kind of nice to be able to go out with friends and to know what that feels like. The teachers were always there to help me throughout my school career. Whenever I needed help, I could go ask them, and they would sit with me sometimes after school to work on work that I needed to do for the next day. So I do live on my own, and it was a new experience for me. People thought I could not do it, and I had to make sure everything was lined up correctly before I moved in, and I had to learn to pay bills. That was a new concept for me. Budgeting some side money for bills, and then what I could spend for entertainment reasons. I also had to learn to cook. I did not know how to cook, and I had to learn. I got recipe books, and I got one recipe book. And then my parents kind of are still teaching me how to cook. One of the biggest struggles for me is cleaning, keeping organized. For some reason, my brain does not see it as a priority when it should be, and I am working on that. It's just hard for me. I do have a license. I was 20 or 21 when I got mine, and it took me a lot longer to be able to feel comfortable before I went to take my test. And my parents just went with me over and over again until I felt comfortable. One piece of advice I would give to students who are struggling is to never give up and tell people what you want, and don't let them intimidate you into something that you don't want to do. Don't let them say, like, you can do it, you're just lazy.
Thank you all for watching, and have an amazing rest of your time at the 2020 Virtual Family Cafe. I will now close this presentation with a performance on my recorder of the Disney song Let It Go.